Last episode, I bought a Subaru WRX sight unseen from an auction, and within minutes, I realized why the previous owner had given up on this thing. Every warning light was flashing on the dashboard, and the engine was knocking excessively loud. To find out if this was even repairable, I had to pull out the engine, which is already a nightmare due to the boxer motor design. I discovered that the engine had spun a bearing on journal 2 of the crankshaft and damaged the crankshaft beyond repair. The turbo was also found to be leaking on the exhaust side. So the question is, can I, someone with zero mechanical experience, try and put this engine back together and save my dream car? Or is this where my dream dies? If I get this wrong, the engine could be scrapped and the cost alone could exceed the value of the car. In this episode, I'm rebuilding the turbocharger and the engine back together for the very first time, and to find out if it will even start, or did I just get myself into trouble? Let's find out. That's our new turbo. We started by removing the V-bank clamp and the wastegate actuator. Once everything was disconnected, the only way to separate the exhaust turbine housing from the center rotating assembly was to carefully break it free using some love taps. We could now work on knocking off the compressor housing to loosen up as well, which was held on by some sealant. Once the turbo was fully separated, the housings were cleaned thoroughly. Turbocharger was gone. Managed to clean it up, making it looking clean. Took out the sealant that was used to stick the turbines in. So the sealer here, so the slight sealer or gasket that's covering it. This is a wastegate. So what happens when your turbocharger builds pressure, it opens when there's too much of pressure in here. It basically acts as a pressure relief valve. Okay, and now we're ready to do open heart surgery on this turbocharger. This is the old, we just need to swap this over. The main thing when rebuilding a turbocharger is to maintain the original orientation of the center housing rotating assembly. This is so that the oil feed line, oil return line, and coolant pods can all line up in the correct position. And that's one reconditioned turbo in. Gaskets were too expensive for Subaru, so we managed to make Velomont work, making our own gaskets. We laid the gasket paper over the mating surface and lightly tapped around the edges with a hammer. The paper cuts cleanly along the edges, creating a precise gasket that matches the pot and bolt hole, which made the gasket a fraction of the cost.
What I'm saying, I couldn't have done a better job.
The bores were already within specification, so no machining was needed. The goal was simply to refresh the surface and restore the crosshatch pattern so that the piston rings would seat properly and bite into the surface. Once honing was done, both case halves were cleaned and blown out with compressed air to remove any debris or residue left over, as this could compromise the entire rebuild. So it's time we put the compression rings on and the oil rings on the pistons. Each piston uses 3 ring sets. The first compression ring seals the combustion pressure inside the cylinder. The second compression ring acts as a backup seal and helps control the oil. Below that is the oil control assembly, which is made up of 2 scraper rings with a spacer in between. This removes the excess oil from the cylinder walls and returns it back into the sump. Got the crank ready and set up. Piston rings are on. Everything is cleaned. Cloths. This is the oil cooler, we need to put that on the block. Case bolts, circlips, everything is here. Loctite, bearings, rear main seal. The block is cleaned and honed. You can see how perfect that scoring is. Okay, time to get this on. Each journal on the new crank was carefully cleaned to ensure that there were no debris or residue that could affect the bearing surfaces. The main and rod bearings were then installed into the case halves and the connecting rods were thereafter torqued to specification. Once everything was in position, the crankshaft was laid with the connecting rods in place. Sealer was then applied to both case halves before bringing them together. But not forgetting, there's 2 O-rings that are critical in the case halves. Once the block was closed up, the case bolts were installed and torqued down in sequence, locking in all the clearances. At this point, the bottom end was fully sealed that would determine how the engine runs once it fires up. This last crankcase bolt is right at the bottom here, and it's hard to get a torque wrench inside. I want to make my own torque wrench with a spanner, and you go. everything is, all the case bolts are tightened up, and we had like 5 here, then 6 on this side, 4 on the other side. Other than that, the pistons are ready to put in, but we have to open the access ports. With the short block done, we moved on to mounting it onto the engine stand, and that's when I realized I missed a really important piece of the old crank, the keyway. So this, I didn't know, it's called a keyway. I still left it on the old crank. So now I learned something new. Without the keyway, the crank gear can move independently of the crank, which throws off timing completely. And that's when the engine could be destroyed once again. I got it set up on the engine stand. We're gonna get ready to hit our pistons through this. The hard part is lining it up. So even though the pistons can go in any order, cylinder 1 is the reference for top dead center, so we have to identify it first. I also prefer starting with cylinder 1 just to keep everything in logical order. When installing the piston, we use a ring compressor to squeeze the rings so that the piston can slide in cleanly into the bore. Once everything is lined up, you must also align the piston with the wrist pin access hole so that the wrist pin can slide through the piston into the connecting rod. Because we put in the wrist pin through a keyhole, we need to already have one circle holding on the other side because there won't be any space to move from the side to put the circle in. The key thing here is lubricating the bores properly so that the piston and rings can slide into the cylinder smoothly. The first piston went in perfectly, and that's when piston 2 gave us a problem. What happened was the piston ring compressor wasn't tightened properly. When we started tapping the piston in, one of the rings popped out and caught the deck of the block.
Are we gonna do that?
Which ended up damaging the ring. Luckily, I had a spare set of rings, so we were able to carry on without major setbacks. But this is a problem. Can't we hit it from here? I don't know, Ari. That's why I bought no more V8 ring.
We got nice.
To fix this, we had to knock the piston out from underneath, and the only way to do that was by working through the access holes in the block. And this was a mission, but we did get it done. From here, the process was pretty straightforward. After placing the head gaskets onto the block, we lifted the machine cylinder heads into position and torqued them down to spec. To torque the new head bolts, we had to first remove the cam bridge and the camshafts to gain access to them. Once that was done, to use a torque wrench and torque them down, and thereafter reinstall the camshaft and the cam bridge. From there, we moved on to installing the new oil pump with a few modifications. Come on.
But I don't think this is going to come loose, huh? My personal opinion. But I want to do it because I don't want to have a problem and say, hey, this bunny tuning, don't do it. I want to do it. He didn't want to do it.
So what we do now, we put in Loctite on the threads of the oil pump, Phillips screws, because it unwinds via vibration. Okay. That's what they said.
We're going to do one at a time so that we don't
Mix it up.
loosen everything. Loctite thread lock, you only put a drop. You don't put a lot. Just need a drop on it. Like that. A little goes a long way.
From there, the oil pump was bolted onto the block, followed by the water pump, the oil baffle, the oil pickup, and the oil filter was all secured in place. And now, it's time to put the most expensive plugs I've ever bought for a car on. This is how your spark plug's supposed to look. Shiny, brand new, no fouling. And that is 4 spark plugs on. Next, let's put in, I think the knock sensor goes in here. Let's do that next. Here's the knock sensor, and that's the knock sensor on. So this is the full long block completed, and she's already taking shape and looking like a beauty. So we just lined up all the bolts for the pulleys so that we can assemble the timing on this engine. Once the engine was taking shape, we started to prepare the long block for timing by installing all the pulleys and the idlers. We did catch one thing that we missed, and that was adding sealer to the cam bridge. So we went back, sealed it properly, and torqued everything down. Okay, all torqued. And because this is a boxer motor, everything had to be done on both sides since the engine has 2 cylinder heads.
find a socket for that. Take this bolt out and use this. Just tap it. So yeah, it's already in. Not right in.
Mustn't be right here.
Must be right in.
Yeah.
Take this out.
That's one ABCS gear on. You must make sure it locates onto the camshaft. There's a pin and it's very easy to make a mistake if you plug the 4 oil journals going to this ABCS cam. From there, we moved on to installing more accessories. We fitted the 2 O-rings underneath the coolant crossover, installed the crossover itself, and started routing the water line. While doing that, I realized that there were 2 hoses on the old water pump that needed to be transferred over to the new one. I also installed the oil cooler pipe along with the coolant transfer pipe that runs from the oil cooler to the water pump. Just figured out how this exhaust manifold fits on. That's the up pipe. So now I can mock assemble this thing and get ready to put it on the thing. So now we can start looking at timing and stuff like that. I was having a problem with I was locating this thing, but it was just spinning the wheel and it was catching against this timing cover. But now you can see the cam spins freely. That was a issue because what happens is this bracket puts pressure on the timing cover, the back timing cover, to push it back so that it doesn't catch a veer. This was a jigsaw puzzle on its own, but I managed to sort that out. Now another problem with this, now we don't have the tool to lock the cam gear so that we can tighten this bolt. What we're gonna do is lock the cams using a shifting spanner while the valve cover is open, and hopefully that can get the job done, tighten on all 4. I drove over 70 Ks again just to get this part. So this is a guide that guides the chain, and it's extremely critical. Cleaning the sump for like the 10th time. The engine was ready for timing, but a lot of hours has already gone into this build. Since this was my first engine rebuild, I wanted to take my time and do it right. Without the cam locking tool, we hold the camshafts in place manually using a spanner while aligning the timing marks on the belt and the timing cover. Explain what we have here.
Okay, there's a timing mark here. There's a crank lines up here, notch. Then you got this intake cam. This is a passenger side exhaust cam. There's a line lines up there. These 2 line up here, and then here again lines up there, lines up here, this corner, and then the 2 in the center. Belt is tensioned. Tensioner is on.
So what we're doing now is making sure that the teeth don't jump. We make sure everything is tightened up and lined up properly. So the engine is timed perfectly. Next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put on these ABCS covers, cam gear covers with the O-rings. Then I'm going to need to solder this plastic cover that cracked. It came cracked. That's how it came out. Better than having a gaping crack. Okay, time to bolt this on. We wrapped up this section up by installing the timing covers, and that was a job well done. After cleaning the sump for like the 1000th time, and anyone who's dealt with a bearing failure knows exactly how bad that job is, I finally fitted it back on. From there, the exhaust manifold, the up pipe and the turbo all went on as one assembly. That's one turbocharger and up pipe on. Now I have to, connect the turbo drain, but before that I just want to put in the barometric sensor. I'll put out the correct name on screen. Put that in, and there's 2 valves. I only had the car came with 1, so I'm going to try and make a plan with the other one. We got our exhaust manifold, we got our up pipe at the bottom there, turbocharger on, we got our barometric sensor. Just need to torque this pulley and it should be fine. Remember, the turbo drain was there. I don't know why they did that, because they have a turbo drain that's directly underneath the turbo. So they took an extended long pipe temperature. But anyway, I'm going to blank it off with this, thread tape it, tighten it, and we should be good to go. So the thread tape is on. Next is to put this on. What I need is to take this T-joint, the joint that they used, and see how long the pipe is so that we can connect it to the turbo drain. So the turbo drain, let's see if I can get this on camera. So we need to connect that straight to this. Turbo is back on. This is a mission, man. Turbo drain sorted. Turbo oil drains from here and it feeds from here on the top. These are coolant hoses. So I just test fitted the intake on the top here, and one of the fuel rails and fuel line is not clearing this throttle body sensor, which is concerning. So that means this has to come out so that I can plug it to that and then put it on. Okay, I managed to get the intake on as a mock foot, but to mock foot this thing, the fuel rail had to go underneath this TGV. That was a nightmare to take that out. Then I had to manage to put in the injectors. So now I'm gonna try and struggle and put the wiring block back. That was a mission. First time we're doing this. Hopefully it goes well. Routing together the engine wiring block felt like a jigsaw puzzle, piece by piece, until everything finally came together. As you just saw the montage, that was me suffering through all the connectors. I managed to make everything fit somehow. What's next is a couple brackets, power steering pump, aircon condenser and alternator. Okay, so yesterday we couldn't get this thing up and running because there's a boost pipe missing from here. I think that goes to the dump valve. This, I had the wrong pipe. These guys butchered it. They put it this into that boost pipe there when it's supposed to be done like straight, but this is an elbow. So I managed to get a straight piece, so that's gonna go off straight from there. Then another thing was missing was this. This goes from that big port to the dump valve. Actually, it's like this. It's like that. Oh, and I had these guys put a 10mm fuel line instead of a 12mm. So that's gonna go easily onto there, to there, and then there. Put this thing on the ground, pressure plate, flywheel, pressure plate, clutch, all in. And here was literally more jigsaw puzzles. But we're just one more step closer to starting this beast. This whole thing lines up, which is absolutely perfect. The back is sorted out. Wiring loom. This clip was broken on this knock sensor. Breather pipe to the head. Brake, booster, breather, vacuum. This was for dump valve. That was the mission to get in. And this is another breather pipe for the boost pipe. So we're getting there. Now I'm gonna put these two hose clamps on and sort out the turbo situation. Once that is on, we should be good to go. Coolant pipe there. All the feeders lines are tightened. All this is tightened. The hose clamps are on. Back end is perfect. Perfect. Back to OEM. Now it's time to put in the air pump. After I put in the air pump, I think there's a thermostat housing thing. I need to find the bolts for that. Okay, the air pump that we are missing is on. I know I'm missing the bracket. I need to put that on. But for now, I'm just trying to get as much things on as possible. Now I'm going to put the engine hoist here so that I can pick this thing up, put it on a tire, make sure I can mount the flywheel to this. We're home stretch now. Get in there. And now it was time to take the engine off the stand and hook it up to the crane so that we can install the clutch and pressure plate assembly. Engine's on the floor. Now we can put on the flywheel. So I'm going to take these bell housing bolts out and put the flywheel on. This is a new clutch kit. I'm going to unbox this thing. This is your new releaser bearing, throwout bearing, some people call it. That's heavy. And this is definitely the clutch. Put the new releaser bearing on, and I greased up the spricket, that's what it's called. That was the mission, but everything is back together. One more step closer to getting this thing in. Now, we should be ready actually to put this thing in. Literally, we should be ready to put this thing in. After months of hard work, months of tears, months of crying, we're ready to go back in with the engine. Power to the starter is on. All the cables are plugged in there. Second oxygen sensor also plugged on. Exhaust hanger bolts plugged on. Turbo flange or exhaust flange bolts all tightened. Next, time to put the alternator. That's one alternator in. Time to get all the hanging parts ready. Put the battery trays in, radiator, aircon condensers, airbox, power steering, all the hoses on. Fill the fluids up, and hopefully we can get ourselves a Subaru WRX. Let's get it. Now you guys can watch this time lapse of me doing exactly what I just said. The moment of truth. The battery wasn't making contact. And it all comes down to this. Don't do this to me. Come on. Come on. Now that's interesting. Battery once again. Again? Please don't be bad. There we go. That's what I'm flippin' talking about. And she's running absolutely smooth. No ticking, no knocking, nothing. Did you see that, guys? It started with one shot. One shot. I'm flipping so excited. Did you hear that exhaust? What the flip? It's crazy. I'm genuinely so proud of how far we come, but we nowhere close to being done. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.